We truly loved each other on such a deep level, but we couldn't make it work. And we didn't know why then, but it was what was revealed to us, which we share in the book, is that the reason we couldn't is because we actually needed to learn through that departing. We needed to learn discernment because we had to let the roles we were taking in each other's lives die. You know, like she had to orient as being broken and not figuring out why she couldn't choose me. And I had to stop chasing someone who was like basically saying, she was saying, I can't choose you. And of course, the little kid in me is like, come on, like if I help you more, like what happens if we read this book together? Let's go to another psychotherapist. Let's, we didn't do ayahuasca. Maybe that would have.
Welcome back to the Medicine Podcast. You guys know me, you know us. It's Mimi here with my co-pilot, my partner in podcasting and life and love with me here.
What is going on, everybody? We are lit up today because we have two special guests. Welcoming back Mark Groves, and for the first time, his beautiful partner, Kylie McBeath. Welcome to the Medicine Podcast.
Thank you so much for having us. I'm so excited to be here and to connect with both of you for the first time.
Yeah.
And me. Come back.
Yeah. Round two. This honestly I was so looking forward to this. I think it's the highlight of my week because our last conversation with you, Mark, was just definitely a highlight of us podcasting, honestly. And we got such good feedback from that episode, and just really wanted to honor how open you were. And I feel like we already know, Kylie, just through your storytelling and through your ability to articulate the really hard stuff of relationships. And so we are so excited to talk to you guys today and dive into some of the concepts in your new book that is coming out very soon. And just be able to paint a picture of hope and encouragement and ownership and responsibility for everyone listening out there in their relationships. So I think we should just get right into it.
Let's jump right in. Guys, the book, Liberated Love. Why this book? And why right now?
You want me to start?
Why not?
Okay, cool. Liberated Love, the concept, or even just the name, dropped into my consciousness right after Mark and I broke up from our first relationship, which in the book we title Relationship 1.0. And I sat with it and I was like, what is liberated love? What does that even mean? And for me, and how I kind of hold it in my body and my being, is it was this journey to remove all of the armor, all of the shackles, all of the walls and barriers that blocked love from flowing freely in my life, in my relationships. And after our rupture 1.0, I just went on a major descent journey. And I was like, I'm getting to the root of this because I am so tired of hitting the same wall in relationships, of not being able to open my heart, of not feeling safe, secure, in my power. And that's really, that's what catalyzed the whole journey. Was like, I'm done. And I know Mark will probably share something similar in terms of like, we got to an end point and we were like, we got to figure out what's in the way here. And on that journey of liberating love, I just learned so many new things that nobody had taught me, quote unquote, but there was no guide or mentor to support me through the roadblocks that I was facing in Relationship 1.0. So I was like, it's time. It's time for a new template. It's time for a new conversation. It's time for a different depth and level that we need to take this to, because there were things that I couldn't name that were outside of my conscious awareness. And through the process of liberating love, it was like, okay, now I can name these. Now I have something to define and label what was actually in the way. And why now? Because I think a lot of people are hitting the same spot in their relationships, in their lives, where they're like, we're tired. We've played these scripts, we've played these narratives, we've played these roles. We're sick and tired of being in these codependent dynamics, outsourcing safety at the expense of ourselves. And they need a pathway, just like we did. And so our prayer is that this book will provide that pathway to move from codependent dynamics or trauma bonds into liberated love.
Love that. It was a great elevator pitch. And if I hadn't already read half the book, I would be picking it up, buying it.
Yeah. You brought up codependency, and that's one of the topics you address in the book. We pulled out your definition. So Mark, I'd love to have you unpack this, if you will, but the definition of codependency is a relational dynamic where we source safety from someone or something outside of ourselves at the expense of our own needs, sense of self, and overall well-being. Unpack that a little bit for us.
Well, codependency as a topic, I suppose it's kind of like a hot Instagram-y pop psychology word now, along with narcissist.
Yes.
But I think as Kai said, these patterns that we're in relationship that we've inherited, that we've witnessed, like there's nothing wrong with needing one another, right? And that needing one another has also kind of been demonized a bit, like to need somebody, to actually build this overt individualism. But, in relationship, you do need each other. You do need each other as humans. And the subject of codependency has traditionally been more navigated from the space of addiction. So there really hasn't been a book discussing it since Melody Beattie's excellent book, which was really written about being in relationship with addicts. But, as humans, we have the need for self-expression, as Gabor Mate talks about, and we have the need for belonging. And when self-expression threatens belonging, belonging wins. And essentially what that definition is talking about is this like, how do I hold on to myself, what I need, what I want, my self-expression, my voice, and be in a relationship with you and honor your needs, your self-expression, your voice. We really saw that as opposed to dynamics that require self-erasure or self-silencing or even presenting as broken to keep the other person being able to keep their role of fixing. We're really saying, like, what happens if we use the frictions of our relationship to liberate ourselves from inherited patterns, from where we don't use our voice? Like the fact that I don't use it in my relationship, how do we create the environment that actually fosters that creates the safety for that? So it requires this exploration, as we do in the book, of like, what did you learn? Like, where did it come from? What's the blueprint that you learned about relationship? And what do you desire to create? I think what was really revealing in our exploration independently and together was just all the ways that all these mechanisms that we have that get in the way of actually being seen, actually experiencing connection, actually experiencing love. That, the masks we wear, we go through those in the book. And I hope I answered that question.
So I'd love to know if codependency serves a function. And I've found myself in conversations probably mirroring some level of pop relationship advice where I'm talking about the pitfalls of codependency. And I was sort of called on my shit by a dear couple friend that we have, the husband of which was terminally ill. And he was essentially saying, we're in codependency right now because his wife had been quite literally taking care of everything A to Z for him. And he was saying it's the most beautiful relational experience that he's had, even in this end of life circumstance. And of course, we see codependence out of necessity when we're children with our parents. But do you find a function for codependency, and where is that relationship with being able to move on from the needs by which we envelope codependency in our various stages of life?
It's a really beautiful question. And one of the reasons why I like our definition of codependency is it's removing shame. It's like, this is a dynamic where we are outsourcing that safety, that security, really that regulation. Like, this is from a nervous system level. Is like, I'm going to outsource this from this other person in order to source that safety and security. And that's a really wise choice when we don't have anything else available for us or available to us or anything that has ever been modeled. I don't know if I would label so much, supporting somebody through an illness as, I don't know the dynamic personally, but like as codependency in terms of, are these people both in choice?
Yeah.
Like, is she in choice by laying down some of her needs and whatever she wants to be doing in that moment to care for him? That's a really beautiful, loving gesture. So I'm hesitant to name it that.
Yeah, I agree with you in that the codependency would be that there wouldn't be conversation about what's being done in the relationship, and also that there's space for her grief, her challenge with giving up so much, right? Which that can even sound like, well, of course you're giving it up. You made a commitment. Right? Again, more shame is entering, but we don't allow for the experience for the person who is doing the supporting, let's say. Like, of course, a child is dependent upon a parent, but the mother or the father still can express to a loving ear, not necessary to the child because that's not appropriate. But that is the challenge with not being a priority anymore, the challenge with taking care of somebody. I think where you see someone as a child taking care of someone with a chronic illness is they erase their own needs. They don't actually develop fully the ability to express themselves because no one in their family has said, hey, must be really hard for you. Like, what do you need? I see that a lot with adults who don't know how to express themselves fully.
Right. I think the most important piece here is coming back to like how we're defining it in the book, which is like at the expense of self.
Yeah.
Like if there is choice, if there is agency, if there is awareness, conversation, like Mark said, we're both bringing our emotions, our needs to the table. That's more adult to adult, helping each other and supporting each other through hard time. In my experience, that's how I would kind of label that. How does that land for you based off of your conversation with him? Yeah,
no, that is significantly more balanced perspective of viewing codependency and in the framework of your book. Totally makes sense. I would imagine so much of this is falling into unconscious patterns of codependency.
In this little cup, I have my favorite way to enjoy mushy love, which is in combination with cold milk. We drink raw cow's milk, and I put it about 8 ounces of milk in with about a scoop and a half of mushy love. That combination, like the cold version of mushy love, tastes like liquid graham crackers. Like, I shit you not. If you don't know yet what mushy love is, it's our mushroom elixir with 500 milligrams of chaga, which is amazing for gut support. They call it the king of mushrooms. And then 500 milligrams as well of tremella mushroom, which is the beauty mushroom. And she is most known for holding 500 times her weight in water. The more hydrated we are, the more plump and dewy and fresh and young our skin looks.
Plump and dewy.
For Mushy Love, go to getmushylove.com and you can use the code MEDICINE for a nice little discount that we only give to our Medicine podcast listeners.
What are the telltale signs that you're in this codependent dynamic that may have these sacrifice of self moments manifesting?
Man, in our relationship, and just from working with, hundreds and thousands of people, there's quite a few, but I would say anxiety, anxiety, feeling depressed, the relationship hitting the same conversations, the same patterns of dialogue. If you're single, dating the same people, feeling resentment is a really good evidence of not prioritizing self. I would say that starting to develop illness, starting to develop autoimmune, starting to develop just like what happens when we have chronic stress and chronic inflammation. What else would you say?
Kind of starting to lose your voice, disconnecting from yourself, your needs, your priorities, your vision, your dreams, everything that you kind of are clear on what you want for your life. When that starts to take a back seat, that's a really good sign that maybe something's out of balance and you're kind of forgetting yourself, or you're losing yourself, if you will. And yeah, for me, I'll just speak from experience, is my body is usually the telltale, the somatic canary in the coal mine, if you will. It's like, if I'm experiencing anxiety or I feel lost, confused, or starting to get ill, there's usually a pretty good indication of like, okay, you're starting to really let go and over prioritize and over orient. Like I always like to say, is like I leave myself and I orient my consciousness around somebody else. And I learned that at a very young age. That's that like really young imprint of like, in order to maintain the secure attachment with mother, I leave myself, I orient around other, all of my energy gets directed over there until I lose myself, until either my body throws up a white flag and is like, yo, this isn't working, or the relationship blows up. Or sometimes both at the same time, which was my case in many scenarios of relational endings. So it's starting to notice, like, where am I? Where is my energy? Like, is it here? Is it in my center? Or is it somewhere else? Like, where am I focusing all of my consciousness? Where am I focusing all of my energy? That's a really, like, more subtle telltale sign. Now, of course, you have to actually even be in your center or be in your own body to even know the difference between orienting around somebody else 24/7 versus being actually grounded, anchored, and centered in yourself. And a lot of our book talks about that, of like coming back into center so that you can differentiate when you leave yourself in relational dynamics. And you do that, again, from a very wise place of needing to source that safety and security. But the more you cultivate that regulation and that capacity in your own nervous system to handle relational discomfort, relational anxieties, you don't have to leave yourself as much, or you learn to not leave yourself as much when things are activated in a relationship based off of your previous relational imprints from childhood.
Yeah, and I'd say that most relationships, which is not, which is how we learn the template of, is that they are a couple people in roles that chose each other from a place of familiarity of what they recognized, what they thought love to be. You know, codependency is normal, which is both fortunate because we have an opportunity, and unfortunate because we have to experience the suffering that it eventually does create. You know, what I see a lot is people wake up in their relationship in their late 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and enter the age. But it's usually with someone they've been with for a long time where they might never have had a self. Like, I see that a lot, especially because the dynamic for self-erasure is especially a template for women. They wake up as, in their 40s in their relationship, and they're like, man, my life has never been about me. Mm-hmm. And that could be true of any gender, obviously. I'm just saying that the socialization is more there for self-erasure in women. And relationships, because of patriarchal structure, were more centered around the needs of men. And men tended to be more under-functioning, and, they're not booking, generally, again, their own therapy appointments. They, like the woman's like, how do I get him to change? If I put another book under his pillow, if I just happen to have a podcast playing in the car when he gets, oh, babe, we should just listen to this.
The oldest trick in the book, ladies.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Who is this guy? Who is this person talking? And I say that because, as Kai said, with such compassion, because it's what you learn. And then there's this opportunity through hitting the endpoints in relationship, which sometimes is actually the ending of the relationship. But can also be, it's definitely the ending of any familiar old dynamic. Those have to die. And in order for them to die, they have to be acknowledged, but they also have to be grieved, and I think that grief comes from being able to label where it came from. And the reason that's so helpful is because then we get to actually recognize why it's not our fault. Like, it's not our fault why we gave ourselves up to survive as kids. It's not our fault why we didn't have needs when we maybe had a narcissistic parent, but we need them now, and that's the thing. Like, what got us here is not going to get us to where we want to go.
Yeah. Yeah. You said it a couple minutes ago, and you literally just extracted the thoughts from my mind, because I'm like, is there an ideal world where an adolescent moves through childhood into college age years, into early adulthood, into, maturity, without some level of codependency somewhere in their adult life, right? And I don't know, is that a necessary experience of understanding what is not, in order to really feel and know and understand and have wisdom around what is? Sort of like, as college age kids or whatever, going out and partying and drinking, and that's a normal part of the maturation process. You don't want to maybe continue that into, where you're 65 years old, still, engaging in those behaviors.
You're the old guy at the club.
The creep in the corner. But it's a natural part of the maturation and individuation process. And so I'm wondering if codependency is like that, where it's, you kind of said it's normal. And I'm just wondering, is there a path or is there a way that someone could move through relationship into marriage or mature adulting without experiencing that to some degree, to know what it is? And I don't know if that's even like an answerable question. It's just something that I guess wondering, like, finding your edges so that you can find your center.
Yeah. I mean, I can say from my experience, I didn't get to just do that simple maturation process. And I think parenting and the way we relate to our child has a lot to do with that. I know that you have a thought on that. So
yeah, no, I love the question. I think it's brilliant. And I personally hope there is. Like, I have a prayer that there is a pathway where we can stay connected to ourselves from early childhood all the way through. And I think that has a lot to do with, like Mark said, parenting and how we're raising our children. Mark and I are new parents, so we're
experts,
very passionate about the topic of parenting and providing our son with a secure foundation for him to know himself, to name his emotions. We're not there yet, but that's my prayer, is that he won't have to leave himself because he never learned that he needed to in order to be loved. Right. So I'm hoping that actually cycle or that pattern breaks through the next generation of parents who are like, we've done the work. We had to walk the path. And now how can we support our children on their own path? But how can we support our children to stay connected to themselves while entering into a relationship? And I think that template starts with the relationship they have with us, of course. And then in terms of maturation, I mean, our culture in general does not have the initiations that our ancestors had that supported us through puberty or through young adulthood into adulthood. So we're lacking a lot of, I think, infrastructure in our culture in general to support the psyche and the self to actually go through some hard things in a contained way. Like you brought up partying and drinking, and it's funny because it's like, yeah, that is a part of like the Western way in terms of you go to college and you kind of individuate from your parents, and that's beautiful. And I'm hoping that we can actually integrate more containment around that process, because let's be honest, I hate to say it, but it's a shit show for a lot of people. And I'm like, can we find a different way to mature and learn? Does it have to always come through?
Do you have to black out at club?
We both did that. And I'm not saying that
I was good at that.
Won't do that. But my prayer is that we actually remember different ways to support the psyche and the self through that maturation process that has a little bit more containment from elders and adults.
Yeah.
Even saying it out loud, does this path exist? It's like, of course it exists, because the potential of anything and everything exists in our awareness. If we can think about it, of course it exists. Sorry to cut you off, Mark.
No, I agree with you. I think recognizing the potentiality, and I think, I know your story as a couple too, just this recognition that we're walking different paths, and it really isn't for the faint of heart, because what is required is this really interesting relationship with trust and trust in self first, because if I can't trust myself, I can't trust myself to hold myself in relationship to you. Like Kylie and I made a dedication to truth above everything, above staying together, because if truth means we part, then that's in service of truth, that's in service of soul. And so there's this really important bridge you have to be walking the whole time, which is the depth to which you love anybody is always mirrored by the grief that you can hold to lose them, because you're feeling that. You have to walk. And that's why any unexplored, unexcavated rejections, abandonments, all the things that are often even inherited, they have to be felt and walked with. And we do that with community. We don't want to touch the depths of our experiences because we're afraid we're going to be swallowed by them. And that's why it's so important to walk with friends, community, partner, whoever is available, to just hold our hand to remind us that there's still, you can get out of this. Like, you're not going to be swallowed by it. We actually need you to be in there to learn what happened, what's to learn there, so you can bring it back to the community. We're talking about these experiences of being initiated as from, like, ideally healthy dependence as a child to healthy interdependence as adults. I think the other part of how the parent relates to the kid is obviously really important, but the other thing is how the kid sees the parents relate to each other. And so really being able to see, like, my mom doesn't silence her voice. We see my father isn't punitive. My father doesn't shrink and not stand up to my mother, or, we're talking heteronormatively, but that could be any relationship dynamic. And I think when a child gets to see two fully expressed people navigate conflict and actually deepen intimacy, and there's an honoring of two selves, like, most of the time we see the conflict as children, but we don't see the repair.
Mm-hmm.
And so we actually don't have, right. And it's like, it happens behind closed doors if it happens,
Mm-hmm.
If it happens, or there's so much freaking scar tissue that it's like somehow a functional digit on the body, but it's like lacking any sort of spirit.
Yeah.
So I'd love to get into charged conversation and conflict. Why? And I would imagine it's such an early indicator of like, hey, time to change, time to evolve, time to maybe rupture and repair, to use your guys' language that you lay out in the book. But can we walk through the experience of a relationship that's evolved into serious relationship or committed partnership, and charge or conflict is arising and repeating, and it's somewhat repetitive? Why do couples find themselves looping back towards the same themes of conflict?
Well, anything that's repeated is because there's something unresolved. So, we can look from just like a simplistic sort of systems mechanism of, well, if a conflict's arising, how you handle that conflict, it keeps meeting the same edges because our skill set is not there to actually provide understanding, to actually also engage in active change. So what you see very often in conflict is people have the same mechanisms of approaching it. You usually have one partner who is more the pursuer of the dialogue and maybe more critical, maybe initiates the dialogue more. And then you have the other one who more distances themselves and withdraws. And, interestingly, at the basis of every criticism is actually a desired behavior, but we usually lead with the criticism, which I can be guilty of too. I say all this knowing all this, but then when you're in a dysregulated state, your nervous system is going off the charts. It's activated. This is why repetition is so important of new skills, especially in more regulated environments. So there's what's happening on the surface of the actual skill set. And then there's what's happening below, which is the nervous system. So I'll just speak quickly to that, and you take over, is that there's usually how we navigate conflict is how the people we grew up with navigated conflict. So we haven't actually seen conflict turned into intimacy, so we actually don't see the skill set. And they often didn't even model it with us. So we are saying that you have to actually like move into a new possibility, but you also have to, from the roots, your nervous system actually develop a whole new way of relating that honors the biological process. Because, I think with consciousness, we like to think that we can somehow remove ourselves from the fact that we have nervous systems, but we can't, as hard as we may try, unless you're Eckhart Tolle.
I think this is where the invitation is to go deeper.
Yeah,
I really do. Like, you keep hitting the same wall, you keep hitting the same pattern. It's getting hot, right? The activation is hot in the relationship container. And in my experience, and also working with clients, this is where we have to go deeper with ourselves and actually increase our capacity in our nervous system to walk a new path, like to walk beyond where we've been, and also where maybe what we've seen modeled. And that's the liberating work. And that's the hard work. Cause it's like, I don't know where I'm going. I don't know how to do this. This is very vulnerable to be the one that leads in a new way or says like, I'm done with this pattern.
Yeah.
Like I don't want to sit here with you. And I think one of the beautiful things that Mark and I talk about in the book, but also in our own relationship, is like, if something's coming up for one of us, it's coming up for both of us.
Mm-hmm.
And so like, there's work that we both need to do here. And through doing that work together and orienting from it as this is our stuff, hopefully maybe it becomes the friction point, the benevolent friction to support us in evolving. Now, there's many pathways to deal with that friction point, right? We talk about that in the book. Sometimes it's leaving the relationship. Sometimes it's creating a conscious container, which I can expand on a little bit, of creating the necessary space we need to actually unhook from the pattern. Because our nervous system is so habituated to the dynamic after it's been happening over and over that we're used to it, right? It just becomes the normal and quote unquote, it just becomes the familiar. So it's like, it's uncomfortable, but it feels safe because our nervous system knows it's safe because they know how to dance around this familiar pattern, familiar dance in relationship. And so sometimes we really need to take a step back. And that can be the most loving thing to do because we can't see outside of the activated nervous system.
Would love to get into the conscious container and then also come back to evaluating how to step away when it's time to step away and, spend what you guys call a sacred pause or something of the like. So maybe let's talk about establishing some infrastructure in this conscious container.
Yeah. So I'll just speak from my personal experience because I'm obsessed with conscious containers. I think they're brilliant and a wise technique for all humanity whenever we're going through these sticky points and we actually need a container to support us through initiation, maturation process like we were talking about before. At the end of Relationship 1.0, I had a call with Mark Wolin, the author of It Didn't Start With You, if you're not familiar with his work. And it was looking at the intergenerational patterns. And I was sitting on the call with him. And before I got on the call, I was like, I don't really need to get on this call. I feel like I'm doing pretty good work. It's a little.
It's always head start.
Yeah, I was like, I'm pretty good. I can see this pretty clearly now, what's happening and what happened.
I'm good.
Within 15 minutes, the guy had like completely blown up my whole consciousness. And I was just like, oh my gosh, wow. I'm just deeply humbled yet again by the elders in my life. And essentially what he said was, I'm going to butcher his words a little bit. Sorry, Mark. But man is mother. Until you do the mother work, you'll continue to really date people that mirror the patterns you have with your mother. So basically how that looks is like you leave yourself, jump into their consciousness, orient around them, pull them close and make them feel good, all to source again that safety and security. So that had kind of just been my like benchmark of how I was in relating and kind of going back to that codependent definition. So essentially what he said is until you break that pattern, you'll continue to repeat this same dynamic over and over. And how you need to break that pattern is you need to step out of relationship with men. And I was like, and he's like, you're probably already dancing, like connect, like you have your tethers out there of like connecting with men to make them feel good, but also to make yourself. He's like, it's kind of like love addiction. And I was like, what? I was like, oh my gosh. And it kind of just was like a light bulb moment because I was like, oh shit. Yeah. I'm definitely dancing the edge here.
And this was when you and Mark were together, correct? Like
no, this is right after we had broken up. Okay. So this was in the sacred pause, but it was kind of the catalyst to stepping into a conscious container. Okay. Because I thought I would just, heal, do the work and go on my merry way and into my next relationship. But this was the invitation. It's like, no. You actually need to remove men and the potential of man from your life for a specific period of time because your nervous system doesn't know how to orient to them in a different way. You've never not been orienting from this way of making them feel good, pulling them closer, intuiting their needs, kind of just like orienting around other. You're addicted to it, basically. You get high from it. It's basically kind of what he said. And I was like, he's like, it's not conscious. There's nothing wrong. He's like, but it's just what's happening in your system. And I was like, oh, awesome. Like, yeah, you're right. And so after getting off that call, I was like, okay, well, I need to remove men from my life and remove the seeking from my life. So I was like constantly seeking, always like looking, where's the next, in conversation and dialogue with really beautiful men, but again, not from a good place, not from a conscious place, I guess, if you will, at that point in time. And that's when I found the No Man Diet container, which I talk about in the book. And this was a 3-month container guided by Kendra Kunov. And it was basically removing men from your life for a specific period of time, minimum of 3 months, to just see what comes up in that process. And I was like, okay, that's simple, 3 months. when I entered into that container intentionally, and I think this is the biggest kicker, is like it's intentional. Like you set a date, start, end, and like during that time, you get very clear on what's a yes, what's a no for you, and what's a maybe. A lot of my yeses were like coming back to self, getting clear and rooted in my own nervous system, desires, etc. The no's were no dating, no seeking, no
flirting.
Nothing.
What? No what?
No
No
source.
flirting. Yeah, no flirting, no sourcing anything from men. And it was like, as soon as I made that commitment and devotion, my nervous system went full tilt. I couldn't even believe what was happening in my body, in my being. I was terrified. Like the actual thought was like, I'm going to die. I don't think I'm going to make it through this.
Up until this point, I don't want to speak for you, but just, intuiting, I would bet a large sum of money that up until this point, you have done a lot of self-development work and self-reflection into your own thoughts and behaviors. And this is not like, you starting day one of your spiritual path or spiritual journey or self-development journey, right? So like, were you surprised at how visceral this response was?
I was shocked. I was like, what is going on? Like, why is my nervous system, why am I freaking out? Why is this such a big deal to consciously remove the opportunity or the potential of dating or of a relationship so triggering to my system? And it goes as deep as is like, well, who am I without men? Do I exist without that male validation? Who am I without that male presence, energy? Who am I without this dynamic in my life? I had no idea. Like, of course I had an idea, but I didn't know how to relate to the world from that new place. And this was after an intense, 8 or 9 years in self-development. And I was like, oh my gosh, wow. I'm yet again super humbled. So entering into that container allowed me to see what I couldn't see. Kind of saved my life. Like it actually brought me back to life so that I could actually mature and step into adulthood and stop relating from a really young place in my relationships to relating from more of a centered, grounded adult space in relationship.
I was not present in that relationship at the time. Like we had a no contact agreement. And for me, I had done a similar type of experience before I ever met Kylie, not knowing I was doing that, but I knew that I needed to change how I related. And I knew that I was very drawn by the drug of intimacy and like short-term relationships because I could control the depth, but it was like a drug. I remember like not being able, I had the choice of like text somebody or don't. And I remember it being like, reaching, just wanting to send the message and not doing it, like witnessing myself be in choice and discernment. I was recently working with a couple women where they were separately, where they were entering into this no man diet. And, men, I think it's very important. Men do it too. And in it, it was so fascinating because one of them said to me, well, I can do a month. And I was like, well, I said, I just wanted to reflect back to her that she already is creating limitations about what's possible for her. Mm-hmm. She's already saying my capacity is only this. Like, because in her narrative, she's got the same nervous system response, but what it's pointing out at, I mean, she even said to me, does it count if I date women? I'm not even into women, but I'm just like kind of thinking about it because I don't want to have to not have any connection. It's very funny. The other person that I was working with had many male connections, friends who wanted more from her, and she was in friendships with men she wanted more from. And I remember saying to her, and this is why this is so important, is because if you can't trust your choices around men, for example, to be able to say you don't even want to be in contact, you're not going to like you're controlling your energy and deciding what gets in and out. If you can't trust your choice to say no to that, then your yes is actually not fully embodied because you don't have access to a no. So your yes actually has conditions. It comes under certain circumstances. And so you won't be able to trust yourself fully, but on a deeper level, and this is what we're talking about, that deeper work, is subtly your partner won't trust your choice in them. because they know you don't have access to a no. They might not know it consciously. It's showing up as like, we're fighting about the same things. I'm looking for security from you. I'm looking for you to accept my relationship request. I don't know if people still do that, but I want you to post us on social media. But really at the depths of that is that there's a need that I have, which is that you will choose me. And now, of course, that can come from the literal lack of safety that's going on in the relationship, that there isn't a fully embodied presence for one another. And when you're still choosing your relationships from your wounding, then you're still sourcing from the relationship. And this is all of us till it's not, which is that if I like need Kai to choose me in order for me to feel validated, of course, her inability was to choose me. Just that's I guess
the beauty of it.
Yeah, the humor, the dark humor of the universe of healing is like, I'm going to keep getting perpetually wounded till I learn how to change how I orient to my wound and orient to people in relationship to me. And so when I finally was able to, and both of us able to choose ourselves to depart in the relationship, that made whoever we chose moving forward, which just happened to be each other, it made that we had access now to choice. We let someone who we truly loved each other on such a deep level, but we couldn't make it work. And we didn't know why then, but it was what was revealed to us, which we share in the book, is that the reason we couldn't is because we actually needed to learn through that departing. We needed to learn discernment. We needed to stop, because we had to let the roles we were taking in each other's lives die. You know, like she had to orient as being broken and not figuring out why she couldn't choose me. And I had to stop chasing someone who was like basically saying, she was saying, I can't choose you. And of course, the little kid in me is like, come on, like if I help you more, like what happens if we read this book together? Let's go to another psychotherapist. We didn't do ayahuasca. Maybe that would have.
Yeah. You should have completed the pop relationship advice checklist.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And when you talk about it in the book, there's a phrase that I'm going to butcher, but it's something along the lines of, our biggest resistance and our biggest fear about knowing we need to move on is the loss of the individual or the relationship. But the reality is that even just the knowing of moving on and taking one step towards moving on, that relationship can't exist any longer. Just like the match doesn't even exist in potential. And so should you even continue to salvage the relationship, quote unquote, it's a brand new relationship. It's completely new. And that resonates really deeply with our story. We didn't work through anything together. We had 3 years of, I'm never going to see you or talk to you again. And then organically reconnected in just a new stratosphere and a completely new domain of existence.
As new beings, like you're talking about.
Such that the relationship felt brand spanking new with all of the nostalgia from the past and a few things that were painful to work on.
Same. Yeah.
How does one practically, in conversation with their significant other, as the things that we're talking about resonate, how does someone approach this through language with their partner to suggest, hey, I'm resonating with this conversation around taking either a sacred pause or some level of intentional, conscious structuring to what needs to happen now, in a way that is inviting, but also sure of one's next step. It isn't like a, hey, we should talk about this. It's like, I am on the path to changing. And I'm inviting you into this space. Practically, how does that look?
Well, I would say there's, the dynamic when you're single approaching what we're talking about is that container that you create for yourself.
Yeah.
And then you have the person who's freshly out of a relationship, which that container is about self-healing and self-preservation and self, right? Again, orienting around self. When we're in a relationship, I think there's like we're going to end. And if we don't do something, we got to do something. And I want to do something. I think the real important, and then I'll get to the sort of the more, maybe we're doing okay-ish, but I want to try something different. That one where the relationship is kind of at, we either go deeper or we don't. One is just actually calling out the truth of that. we talk about this in the book of like, there has to be a dedication to truth, because the problem is that when we have these adaptive strategies where we're not using our voice, we get to these endpoints because so much has built up. And so there has to be like, it's truth now or nothing. Like I can no longer be in a relationship with you and not just point at all the things that we, through adaptive strategies, have learned to sweep under the proverbial rug, and now we're tripping on it. And so there's that aspect of like, here's what I want to create. Here's what I think it looks like. I really want to create it with you. Do you want to do that? That is a conversation that is exactly a conversation we had, which was like, I said, I want to create a life. I want to create a family. I want to have kids. I want to do it with you. If you don't want to do it with me, that's okay. I love you, but I'm not abandoning my story. And that was like one of the most liberating conversations we had, because one, I felt like, bam, like I'm standing for me.
Yeah.
And she felt safe on some level because I said, I still love you. Like, I honor this in you. Like, wow, like I've been on the other side of this conversation, and I wanted desperately someone to tell me they still love me, even though I had to choose myself.
This is fierce love. This is not, this is brave work. Like having that conversation of, hey, something needs to shift. This isn't working. I want to try a sacred pause, or, what I want to enter into this conversation with you to create a container to support us in being able to heal and mature separately and together. I know that's going to kick up a lot of people's nervous systems for sure. Because it's like, I'm committed to growth and healing with you. And there's also on the back end of that is like, and it might not be us staying together. Like that's the ultimate truth, is like, we have to be okay with that.
And that's true anyway.
And that's true. Yeah.
Right?
That's true for all of us.
We're just saying, let's just say it.
Yeah.
Like, let's just say it, because that's freeing. Because now if us having to work out or having to choose each other is the necessary result, we're not actually going to be fully self-expressed. Because now if I say something or bring material forward into the relationship that needs to be worked, I won't do it if the cost is potentially the relationship. And you see this all the time in relationships. People make vows, quote unquote, but their vow isn't to being fully self-expressed. It's to staying together forever. And so if the same thing that can break us up is actually the same thing that liberates us, whether it's individually or together anyways. So, when you're in a relationship and and if you're listening and you've kind of hit the sort of bump that you're like, oh, I love my partner. We love each other. We're kind of interested in personal growth. If you're listening to this, you probably are. And I would like to try this. I think what always has to begin, well, one is the recognition that your partner is saying no to what you first present isn't always because they just don't want to. It can be because they're afraid of what you're presenting.
Right.
I think whenever anyone starts to step into a self in a relationship that required the erasure of one or both people, there is a fear, because if you come fully alive, I might lose you. If I come fully alive, I might leave you. We might not work anymore. And that's true anyway. So this is why it's this dedication to just calling out reality. And there's just something so freeing about that.
Yeah.
Because we finally said it. And of course, we have to get really good at standing in that place of saying, I love us. Like, I love you. And I really want to either, do this book. I want to take a course. I want to go to a seminar. I want to whatever. And I want to do it because I want to create something different with you. And I care about your self-expression, your dreams, your passions, as much as I care about my own. Are you in? And the other person might say no. I remember with Julie Gottman, John and Julie Gottman, for those who don't know, they're like the godfather and godmother of marriage research. And they have a book called 8 Dates. And I was talking to Julie and I was saying, well, what happens if you like bring this book forward to your partner and your partner's like, I don't want to read this book. I'm like, you just break up with them? She's like, no, Mark, you do not. He was like, you ask them why. You get to the fear that's at the basis of not saying yes. And so I think it's just always important. I think because this conversation is usually surrounding men, women have spent the majority of their lives socialized to connect through emotion and conversation and dialogue. A lot of that's survival based, but it still is. And so for men to confront emotionality is to have to rebel against quote unquote masculinity. So, if you're 30 years old and you're a woman, and again, I'm generalizing, you have probably a little more emotional articulation than a man who's 30 years old, who up until that point hasn't been able to express through emotion. It's not safe to, other than anger and maybe joy and lust. So, I think just to give context to that, I think there's a beautiful movement, of course, happening now with just like men doing incredible work together, and we need to do that together. But we're being called forward by our partners often, and we're not answering and not listening, and then we wonder why they leave us.
Right. Right.
But it's actually not a mystery if we were to dissect the relational arc.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that sense of freedom whereby one partner can leave the dynamic of the relationship is oddly the most nutritious thing for choice of the partner. And in our part too, it's one of the reasons we have not gotten remarried, is because both of our non-negotiable was, this needs to feel like a choice, and it needs to continue to feel like a choice. And damn it, man, sometimes it is scary to think that we are both giving each other freedom to leave tomorrow. That being said, those moments where there is connection, which is often, and those moments that could seemingly have in part one of our marriage felt normal as a part of husband-wife relationships, feel so much more deep and as if they are a gift, because of the fact that we are free to choose whatever direction we take our individual lives. And I'm not going to lie and get overly arrogant to say that, I'm totally unattached to where this relationship goes, because I would be a fucking mess if it ever ended.
Yeah.
And it's something that
I was.
Yeah. That being said, like, leaving space in the relationship for that freedom has been the injection of abundance that we really, really have felt in part two, as we tease out the difference between one and two.
And as we discuss getting remarried, we have and we've put together like a ceremony that's going to happen in the next few months, just us. And we'll have to find a way to keep that consciousness of the relationship as the third entity that we are adding to and depositing into every day, and leaving that choice there with the contract of marriage in place. And so it's going to be a whole new like button on the remote that we have to figure out how to work, because in part one, it was a different story. I'm curious for you guys, in your personal experience with each other, and then also in your work with clients, do you ever see it work out long term, meaning people are happy in their relationship, if this isn't like a dual agreement, if it's just simply one person saying, you know what, I'm going to really dig into the work. I went to a John Wineland workshop and I read this book, and, I'm going to really dive deep into this work. And they maybe don't have the conversation that you just laid out so beautifully, or maybe they do have it and the person says, nah, I'm not really into that. It's just not really my thing. You do you, boo. If it's coming from one side, what's your opinion there? Does that ever work?
I mean, I think it's both. And in that, yes, it can work, because of course we're talking to all the potentialities. I don't know that it would work long-term without some curiosity as to the process. Like, of course, if we're in a relationship and I change how I orient to conflict, I'm doing nervous system work, you will be indirectly doing it with me. Because I'm, if I'm someone who's prone to getting defensive, which I am, if I all of a sudden am like, take a breath, and I don't, and I say, hey, actually, you know what? There's a lot of truth in what you're saying. My partner is going to be like, what the heck just said?
Yeah.
Right. And they might not trust that. So, in Harriet Lerner's work, she calls it a change back move. So we'll like try to get back into the system. But if I can actually learn how to change how I orient to the system will change. And this is true of like how we move in culture, community, families, right? Because I can do deep work, and often you'll hear someone do personal work and then they start changing how they relate to their parents. And then their parents actually start changing how they relate to them. So it is absolutely possible. I'd say where you might meet friction, I'm curious of everyone's thoughts on this, is that you might start to shift what is a fundamental value of how we're orienting to the relationship, which is that I'm really interested in growth and bringing this relationship most alive. Here's what I'm doing in service of that. And the other person's like, great. Like there has to be at least the desire to see how one can be better and take responsibility for that. I think within really all successful relationships require is two people who are actually curious and willing to take change and take responsibility for their lives, and to use the relationship itself as a vehicle for that. Our partners offer a window into what we don't do well better than anybody. And if we can see, as Kai was saying earlier, it's like, if something's coming up for her, it's coming up for me. I just might not know, and vice versa. So I think that, yes, it can change it, but I do think that there has to be sort of a way that both people are changing to how they're orienting to growth and responsibility. What do you think?
Yeah, I love this question. In my work with a lot of women, walking them through creating conscious containers, a lot of them are married or in partnership, and they might, not step fully into that conversation at first, because they're like, ooh, that's a big one. That's a big pillar of my life. A lot of stuff would have to shift for that to actually even be made manifest in my relational dynamic. So what's beautiful about this work is like, you can tailor it to yourself where you're at any given moment, whether you're married or not, or in partnership or not, is like, for instance, like I'm working on healing the part or piece of me that wants to people please. And so where does that show up in my life? In addition to just even my marriage, it shows up in my work relationships. It shows up with my parents. Maybe it shows up with my friends. So you get to kind of play with that pattern for yourself with yourself in your own conscious container. And like Mark said, the beautiful thing of doing that work is like, I'm aware that I'm working on ending this pattern, this dance, and these dynamics. And so you can start really in any area of your life, and it'll start to trickle into every area. Now, my belief is that as you continue to come back into your center and shift the dynamics in your life, that you will reach a point where your partner has to choose to grow or change or shift their own steps with you, because, that's just the name of the game. You're either going to be resistant to that and, it won't work, or you're going to step up and make a different move, if you will.
Yeah, I think out of context of the book or, the conversations we're having, it would be very confronting to be presented with this idea of taking a sacred pause. And I think what's beautiful about that is we have to create the space to allow the resistance to come up, because what's below the resistance is fear, and that fear exists anyways. So like, what an opportunity for even just having the conversation is going to change the relationship. And is going to change or challenge us, especially, I would say naturally, the archetype of the person who is bringing something forward is probably the person who generally brings things forward, and probably sometimes also even minimizes their voice or their needs. And so I think there's the personal work in just bringing it forward, but actually gently sometimes drawing a line in the sand, and also being able to be with the other person's experience of their request, which the other person's gonna have. Like, we have to learn, like when Kai presented, when we first started our dating container, when we got back together, we created a dating container, and she was like, so there's gonna be no penetrative sex in that time. And I was like, I'm not really sure about that one. I'm not sure that I'm interested in the use of the word penetrative, and I'm also not interested in not experiencing it. And, but I can say I was open to why, and I liked why, because it allowed us to be more discerning in the pace of the re-entry. Oh my God, there's too many jokes. But in the coming back together, God, another joke. But what was really amazing about it is I saw the wisdom in the request. I didn't like it, but I also got to be with why I didn't like it, which was it was how I sourced connection. It was how I sourced safety a lot of the time. And we got to play on first, second, and third base a lot. It was great.
We got to cultivate it in new ways, the intimacy and the connection.
Yeah.
Like, the energy couldn't move in a similar way.
Yeah.
And kind of just circle back to the previous, like I've had clients who create a container for themselves based off of where they're at and what feels comfortable. And through that process of individuation, of coming back into their own bodies, being, truth, needs, etc., they start to gain the confidence they need to have the hard conversations in every area of their life, where they're like, okay, I'm no longer going to tolerate, sound a little extreme, but I'm no longer going to tolerate abuse. I'm no longer going to tolerate manipulation. I'm no longer going to tolerate all of these things that I've been tolerating for my whole life in any relational dynamic. And it's being in relationship with other people who are modeling that level of like clarity and also that level of self-integrity that allows us to hold that new bar of relationship in every single area of our life. And eventually, as you hold and continue to hold that bar, people that aren't in alignment with stepping up and doing the work to meet you in those places will kind of, at least in my experience, kind of fall away. Or you'll get to a place where you're like, I'm not interested in this dynamic anymore because I physically can't actually be in it.
Yeah. Healthy boundaries create so much more clarity in our life. And that is freeing in and of itself. And last question from me, if you can give, a few sentences to your guys' personal experience coming through relationship 1.0, we call it part 1, relationship 1.0 into this relationship 2.0, this season of liberated love. What has that felt like for you individually? How different is this experience?
Oh my gosh.
Way different.
You used a word earlier, nutritious. It's nourishing.
Mm-hmm.
This relationship is life-giving, not life-draining. It's mysterious in that, like, I'm relating to it from a place of not needing it. That when I relate to Mark from not needing him to source whatever it was I was historically sourcing, safety, security, regulation, we're actually free to adventure down so many different new pathways together. And the horizon doesn't end. It's like, who are you now? Where are we going to go next? How can we co-create what it is that we desire and dream of in this world? And so for me, relationship 2.0 is freedom. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm free to be all of me here. Every single part, every single truth, every single desire, every single need is welcome and I know is safe. And with that foundation of safety, I mean, you can do anything together. You can really navigate what feels like everything.
Yeah. I think when you change from the 1.0 way of relating, which is from this unconscious or more unconscious space, and change to actually being intentional and fully, trying to be fully self-expressed. I say that because I feel like you're never really in integrity with your full potential because your potential is always expanding. And so, but can you continue to step into it? Can the relationship be the place that you play with things, that you test things, that, when you have a deep belief that you're inadequate, then the frictions of your relationship are going to validate your inadequacy. When you have a deep belief in your value, which might only begin through the recognition or mirroring of your value from your partner first, which is sometimes how we come to it. They're like, you are so amazing. And you're like, actually deep down, I'm not, right? There's the opportunities for change become actually evidence of your potential rather than inadequacies. And I think, what relationship 2.0 has offered us is, we oriented the frictions differently because we're not in the same moment trying to protect from being witnessed, from the wound being witnessed. Because it's not being agitated anymore, even though it's safe to come forward. It doesn't mean we don't get triggered. We just had a baby, like welcome to more emotional exhaustion, and then revealing what is still not fully excavated. I'm like, man, I thought I'd worked on this communication thing. And like, apparently when you haven't had much sleep and, you're feeling like your needs aren't as important anymore, like internally, like it's all of a sudden you're like, oh, I guess I have more work to do. Yeah.
Oh man.
But there's space
beautiful.
for all of it.
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
key.
Yeah.
No, absolutely incredible. I wish we had a couple more hours with you guys to get
Yeah.
into this further. Even reading thus far and knowing our own relationship experience, these tools are structured and they're intentionally structured, and it's only for the purpose of having them turn into almost an unconscious pattern where we are competent without even thinking about it. And it gives us an opportunity to groove. And when we groove and intuitively flow in our relationship, forgetting these tools and these structures and these blocks that we've put in place, we oftentimes look back and go, wow, I wasn't even thinking. And that today was fucking awesome. Like,
Right.
we weren't even applying the precision instruments that we've learned along the way to ensure that this works out in the way that we would like. It just flowed. It just happened. And it's that transcendent experience of the structure, but the structure is so critically important. And this book, Liberated Love, is another incredible modality for injecting just abundance and vitality into relationships. Where can people find? I think this episode will drop as the book is released. But where's the best place for folks to find you two and get their hands on this incredible work?
So you can find more of me at Create the Love on Instagram or the Mark Groves podcast.
More of me on Instagram as being as beautiful.
And all my courses are on createthelove.com. But our book, more importantly, is at liberated-love.com. And you can get it basically wherever, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all the different books, bookshop.org, all the places. Thank you so much for having us on.
Yeah,
Awesome.
thank you so much.
Thank you guys so much.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with us and our listeners. And you guys, if this resonated, check out the show notes. Grab this book. If you change nothing in your relationship, nothing will change. If something resonated, that's your intuition that's nudging you towards expansion. So take action on it today with curiosity and compassion for yourself and your loved ones. And send this episode to someone you love. If it impacted you, we would love the help in getting this good information out there. We will talk to you next time. Go spread some light. Okay, bye.
Thank you so much for listening.
If you enjoyed that, check out right over here for some more fun clips.
Oh, and you're going to want to subscribe.
Bye.